All right. Good morning, Doug. Today, I want to talk about something that's a little bit more of a esoteric topic, I guess. Last week, we had a conversation, you and I, separately from this, where I was at the conclusion I'd come to and looking at what's happening in America is that Americans don't believe in anything anymore. They don't believe in anything. And I mean, it doesn't seem like they believe in themselves. Certainly, there's no confidence in themselves. There's questioning and judgment around ourselves. And both Americans broadly, and I think the individuals that I happen to encounter, I don't even think that people have maybe because of a lack of moral clarity, people don't even recognize good and bad happening around them. So they're almost unable to defend themselves because they can't, like they see a cop abusing them, for instance, and they, by shutting down their business, and they say, well, you're just doing your job. Like they can't recognize that this is an evil act being done on them and that they have a right to defend themselves against it. They justify their behavior. So we had this conversation last week, and then a couple of days ago, you sent me Paul Rosenberg's newest issue of his newsletter, The Free Man's Perspective, and in it he kind of covers this same issue a little bit in a different way. And essentially, he's talking about the necessity of having meaning in your life, how it's critical to have meaning, and he also brings in this idea of entropy in there. And anyway, just I'll toss it to you, and I guess what are your thoughts on this, on the idea that maybe people don't believe in anything, don't believe in themselves anymore as the fundamental problem, and then Paul's ideas about the solution to it.
Yeah, really important subject, actually. And maybe the fact that people don't believe in anything anymore in any way. They're floating around like an abstract, philosophical, moral, ethical, religious, if you wish, void. Maybe that's one reason why zombie movies and TV series are so popular today. They kind of resonate with that very fact. I mean, the zombies kind of plod on pointlessly. So I'm just wondering if, because so often art does reflect the time and place that it's done in. So, and also, you mentioned the concept of entropy, and there are very few laws that I believe in, trust me. But one of the most important laws that I do believe in is the Second Law of Thermodynamics, which basically speaks to entropy. And of course, the laws of thermodynamics, there are four of them, going from the 0th to the 4th. And actually, I'm taking a video course on them, and they're quite interesting in that they deal with what happens with temperature and pressure to turn gases into liquids, into solids, and how this relates to all. Very interesting. But what's important, actually, that relates to what we're talking about now is the second law of thermodynamics, which basically says that, well, it's entropy is what it's all about. Everything winds down, everything falls apart, except when there's an outside input of energy. That's the key. Absolutely everything will wind down and collapse or die. We're talking from an amoeba to a star to a galaxy. Absolutely everything will, unless there's an outside input of energy. And
do you think the realization of that, when people start to see that, do you think where nihilism comes from? Because you see that everything is falling apart. It doesn't seem to matter that much because it's all going to decay anyway. It's all dust in the wind, as you often say. I mean, do you think it's the recognition of entropy that makes people nihilistic?
Yeah, well, I've been accused of nihilism myself. And perhaps that's one of the reasons why I'm such a huge fan of Rick and Morty. Because, Rick basically doesn't make a big deal out of it. But he seems to control the universe. But he doesn't care. He destroys things. Yeah, sure, I understand. I understand nihilism, and something to be said for that. It's like a kissing cousin in some ways of solipsism. Actually, keeps things in perspective.
It
It
does.
recognizes that everything, in fact, does fall apart. But maybe that's, once again, this is related, but not the same thing as the moral problems that we have today. Did we talk about that interview with, I think it was Yuri Bezimov, the Russian KGB agent?
We did quite a while ago, but I think it's worth talking about again because within this context, for sure.
Yeah, maybe you can find the interview because it
I'll
was
link to it.
absolutely spectacular. So Bezimov was a KGB agent who defected to the West, actually Canada, not the US, as I recall, in 1985. And he said, having been brought up in the Soviet system, they thought about this and how they were going to destroy their enemy. And they recognized that destroying your enemy had a moral component more than a physical component. And he doesn't mention this, but it's a fact that Napoleon, one of his best aphorisms, in my opinion, was that in war, the moral is to the physical as 3 is to 1. I think I've got that right. And that is so true. That's what Bezimov says. He basically says that the Soviets, being chess players and big picture thinkers, which the Russians are, that's why they win all these chess tournaments. So what did he say? He said, first, you have a moral collapse. What was the second thing that he said? Do you recall?
I can't remember, honestly.
It's kind of embarrassing. I think first you have a moral collapse where what's happening right before our eyes, where people, I remember now, people don't believe in anything. They don't believe in themselves. They question all their values. They don't know what's right and wrong anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So once you destroy that basis of a civilization, it's going to reach a crisis. And we're at that crisis now. And after the crisis is a new normal, a reset, actually, is what he said. This is in 1985. And back in 85, he said, as far as I'm concerned, the US and the West are collapsing way ahead of what we could have possibly imagined. He was shocked at how quickly it had happened. And of course, it was starting in 1985 because it was about then, it was the early 80s when I remember watching Saturday Night Live, and I think I've mentioned this in the past, but it's worth mentioning again. The first time I ever heard the term politically correct. And it was on Saturday Night Live, and it was a part of a funny skit. And I thought, well, it's just part of a funny skit. And politically correct, that's kind of fun. That's like our version of the Soviet term, politically unreliable, kind of the opposite of politically unreliable, which is a big term with the communists. But it turns out Bezimov was absolutely right. And I don't see at this point how the West can win, because what you were saying to start off with, entropy's wound down our moral systems, and nobody believes in anything anymore.
Well, one of the things, Paul had the way Paul says it, people must have meaning. That's what he was, one of the basis of his newsletter issue this month. He said people have to have meaning, and he kind of goes on to define it as the little man problem. That if people feel like they're little and that their life is meaningless, then a society can't go on. So that everybody has to find a place essentially where they can feel as though their life has some meaning. And for him, one of the things, the ways he defines it is, he says there's something special about humans. He says we are creatures that willfully and creatively reverse entropy. We can and do reorganize the existing world into better and more useful forms. Furthermore, we choose to do this, and we're able to consider a limitless number of options. So in his mind, it seems that the only answer to this entropy, the only answer to this the situation we find ourselves in, essentially, is to recognize that we are individually the creative forces that actually work against it, and that there is great meaning in that. There is remarkable meaning in that, and working around. But you have to work around the actual physical world around you, not on the abstract idea sphere of, when no isms, no republicanism, no progressivism, like no ism will get you there. You're not going to find any, you're not going to reverse entropy by focusing on these large scale delusions, essentially.
Yeah. Well, from a moral and ethical point of view, and a philosophical point of view, you've got to, there've got to be some beliefs if you're going to, as Frank Sinatra liked to say, make it through the night, anything that gets you through the night. So cigarettes, booze, women, I mean, I guess that'll all get you through the night, but not over the long run. And this is why religion, I think, has been with humanity since day one, absolutely day one. You have to believe in something. You have to believe in something. And people have come up with various gods. And what happens, what is happening in the West is that, I'm not a fan of religion for all kinds of reasons. I mean, to start with, I don't believe in God, which absolutely shocks and disgusts a lot of people, but it's just a fact. And I say that as somebody that was indoctrinated for the first 18 years of my life with Roman Catholicism, which lays everything out as logically as St. Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century could possibly have made it. But I don't believe in any of that. And we could have a discussion on atheism sometime in the future, or agnosticism too, which a lot of people are partial to.
Yep.
But anyway.
To recognize the value that religion has brought to humanity in that it has filled this void of meaning that people must have. And whether that's the best way to fill it is probably not the case, but something must fill this void.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And there were 3 books that were written a few years ago that all hit the bestseller lists about the same time. One by Christopher Hitchens and one by, I met Hitchens once. I was introduced to him, of all things, by, who was that assistant? Paul Wolfowitz. Now, there's a crazy connection.
Oh.
Yeah, that's kind of insane. But he's the one that introduced me to Hitchens. And then who wrote the book, the book on the selfish gene?
Oh, Dawkins?
Yes, Dawkins. And he wrote the other book, the second book on atheism. And I liked his book, The Selfish Gene, so much that when I was in London one time, I asked a student that I knew at Oxford to call him up and set up a lunch for me. And I had a very pleasant lunch with Dawkins, way back before he was famous for being an atheist. And I forget who the third guy was. Anyway, doesn't matter. So, okay, I'm an atheist. I think that people that, are very religious, well, are problematical, and it used to be, the reason I bring those books up, I used to mock religious people and mock their religious beliefs. I don't do that anymore because it's something that holds them up. And if you destroy, even if it's a crutch, if you destroy the crutch that's holding somebody up, now you're dealing with not just somebody that's had the foundation pulled off from them. You can't do that. But the trouble is that to an individual, forget about a civilization. And in Europe, they don't believe in anything in Europe. I mean, Christianity is a dead man walking in Europe, which, as far as I'm concerned, means that as there are more Mohammedans that invade Europe subtly, a lot of these ex-Christians are going to convert to Islam. That's going to happen. And, or they'll convert to dogmatic socialism, which is actually a secular religion. Communism, socialism, you know, Nazism, they're all secular religions. They give you something bigger than yourself to believe in, because you've lost. If you believe in nothing, somebody said, then you're likely to believe in everything or anything. That can happen.
Exactly.
So,
It does feel like this
we
wokeism.
can.
It does feel like this
Yeah, that's
current thing. Wokeism is filling the void right now, among
it is.
young Americans.
It's a secular religion.
Yeah.
It is. It's a religion without Yahweh or Jesus or whoever or Allah as a centerpiece. That's correct.
Yeah, and it seems like it's a pretty evangelical jihadist like religion, even, You're supposed to destroy
yeah,
everything.
it is. It is. If you don't believe in it, they're pretty much like the Mohammedans. I mean, you're not worthy of living, frankly.
Right. And the core of it is because they don't believe in anything else, then that void gets filled with this. I mean, this looks like insanity to most people, and this is how, like, any, I mean, it looks like insanity, but it's just a religious fervor.
Yeah, and this is one of the reasons, of course, that I'm partial to the classical civilizations, ancient Greek and Rome, where you were supposed to believe in the gods, but that wasn't important. What was more important was that you gave cult to them. In other words, you didn't have to believe in all the what we call myths, but it's really unfair to call their religion myths and our religion theology.
Right.
So, this is a distinction that people don't like to confront, but the important thing in Rome, well, both Greece and Rome actually, was not that you actually believed these things, but you had to make a public display of worshiping the gods, because it was one of the things that held society together. And this is one of the reasons why Gibbon in Decline and Fall put his finger on Christianity as a major factor in the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. And I completely agree with him, actually. I wrote an essay about that that's, I think, pretty good. And we can send it to anybody that's listening to us.
Yep. Yeah. If anyone, I'll send that out to you. Can there'll be a description where you can sign up and join our email list, and I'll send it out to everyone on that list, because it's definitely it's very well done.
It's pretty good. Actually, there was an editor at the Atlantic of all publications that sent me an email. I don't know how the hell he got a hold of the essay, and he said, it's really good. I really enjoyed it. And I wouldn't expect that from the kind of people that write in the Atlantic. Although, truth be told, I like to read the Atlantic a lot. It's like I read the New York Review of Books, which is almost a communist publication.
It really is.
And the London Review of Books, which is even worse.
You recommended that to me, or you told me you read that like 5 or 6 years ago, and I started subscribing to it. I'm like, these people are nuts. They are crazy.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I like to know what's on the enemy's mind and what they're thinking. But occasionally you get people that are real experts on something. And if you can, get their ideology out of the other knowledge they have, yeah. And I like to get out of my own silo.
You have to.
And see that you got to. You absolutely have to. So, but anyway, the important thing with them was that a public display of shared values, which were represented by their theology and by the Iliad in particular, which kind of in written form put forward, their values and whatnot. So we've lost that. We don't have any common book anymore. We don't even have Shakespeare anymore. I mean, when I was a trustee at Washington College, which is distinguished only by the fact that it's the 10th oldest college in the country, but nothing else, I've got to say. I went to a class taught by a Marxist English teacher, and I asked him, you ever teach Shakespeare? He was teaching a book that was written by a black guy who was in jail. Okay, that's fine. I mean, most people in jail are black. That's a fact. And most of them are ignorant and thugs, but some of them are really smart, and some of them change their ways, et cetera, et cetera. So I happened to read the book, and I said, yeah, it's kind of an interesting book, but what's this being done? What's he doing teaching this in an English class? I mean, kind of an interesting story, but
Yep.
it's not Shakespeare. I mean, and we don't even have Shakespeare anymore. There's nothing kind of binding the society together in the way of values or anything. So entropy is taken over.
Well, don't you think you build this up? So I think part of what I got from Paul Rosenberg's article was that, you can't, the recognition that there's entropy through the system and that the culture is sort of decayed and that there's not meaning to be found in it anymore and any of the shared values. But the only way that you could possibly reverse it is by actually stepping back from it and focusing on finding meaning in your own life in the things that are around you. You like in the simple things. And he describes a whole bunch of different things from like he talks about pluralism, and he means like in these associations, you and I've talked about this before. You were part of all these luncheon groups, and everywhere you've lived, you've had these different social groups basically that you would connect with and that you would have build relationships with that were real and local. And then he talks about focusing on families more, because actually family, you can find meaning in your family. By investing in it, you can find value there. And he talks about homeschooling instead of sending your kids to government schools and things like that. Anyway, he goes through about 9 things, I think, where he says he said people need to be able to find meaning around them in order to start to get that moral clarity about what right and wrong is, because they find meaning in what they're doing, they develop moral clarity, and then that can eventually, branch into the wider culture. But it's not a top-down thing where, we're not going to find what's right and wrong from the culture at this point. The signals are all broken.
No, that's right. And when some strong man tries to impose it from above, you wind up with a Stalin or a Mao or somebody like that tries to tell you what's right and what's wrong. And that doesn't work. It's got to be internally generated, starting with the individual. But I don't know if there's many individuals. Do you get any moral compass from watching the Kardashians and most things on TV? I mean, they can, all kinds of things on TV are entertaining,
Yep.
but is there anything that actually is telling you and describing in a thoughtful, logical way a view of the way the world works? I question that, really.
I do too, but I don't see it in the main culture. But I think because again, most of the culture, the main culture, the entertainment complex or whatever, is a top-down thing. So, but you do see, you do find this on YouTube. I mean, you do find this in the success of Jordan Peterson a couple of years ago. I mean, that's what he was teaching. He was like, here's some moral clarity. That's what he was selling, was moral clarity, and people ate it up. So it means, I think people are hungry for it, even though and it's just not being fed by the culture.
Yeah, you're right. And this is the same thing happened with Ayn Rand when she wrote her books during basically the 1950s. She didn't have the means to promote them, or the internet didn't exist. And before the books became popular, she wasn't on TV. They caught on the way Jordan Peterson basically did, like wildfire. People were looking for something that would explain the way the world works.
Right. How the world works and how they can relate successfully to it. I think that's what people are very hungry for. And it's out there. There are answers.
Yeah. And people want to know what's right and what's wrong. And probably the closest thing we have to that, I mean, other than lectures from preachers, most of them are misguided, in my opinion, what they say and why. I think that cop shows on TV, I'll bet that cop shows are as popular as they are. I'm going to guess that they're 50% of all the shows that are on the air. I don't know what the number would be for cop shows. Could it be 50%?
Boy, it certainly could be between all the detective shows and the Criminal Minds and, all the documentary and all the fiction. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of stuff that's geared toward that.
Well, if that's true, then that is as close as most people come to a moral lesson, where somebody does something that is a real crime, arguably a real crime. Sometimes they're, drug crimes, which aren't real crimes, which clouds the issue a lot. And then they're pursued and punished
Brought
for
to justice. Yeah.
right and wrong, good guys, bad guys. And this is one of the, talking about, a moral void that we have, the fact that Western movies at one point were really, really popular, and Westerns on TV. Half of all the shows on TV were Westerns. This was true in the 50s and up to even the 60s, part of the 60s. And now I don't think there are any cowboy shows or movies, very rare. I mean, at this point.
Yeah. Occasionally there are movies that come out, but no,
Yeah.
not like it once.
Nothing, not in a series. There's no series. There used to be all kinds of these things. And they used to provide also a real moral compass, much more than cop shows did, because they were always dealing in real crimes. That's why, for my money, one of the best things that's ever been on TV was Have Gun, Will Travel.
Because you can now find all on YouTube. It's all on YouTube now.
And it's wonderful. I couldn't urge people more strongly to watch that whole series, because Paladin was a vigilante, but he had a real moral code of what he would do and what he wouldn't do, and he would explain it to people.
Right.
And that's why, time for a commercial. That's why Paladin is a major character, a modern day Paladin in this book, Assassin, which once again, I urge everybody to buy, because it is a moral analysis of the world that we live in.
You really should buy it, and really should read all three in the series. This is the third one. It's the best one in my opinion, but you really should read them all. You should encourage, and it's great for Christmas for other people, because it's very entertaining, and but there are mind viruses in it that can help purify people's thinking. They can get people to think better about how the world works and how they can relate to it effectively.
Well, thanks, Matt. I appreciate that plug, but I think it's quite accurate, actually. So
I think so too. Okay, so the biggest thing is, we know. As far as what people can do, I think that I definitely would encourage everybody to go and subscribe to Paul Rosenberg's newsletter. I mean, Paul's a great guy. We should actually have him on here at some point. He's a very, very, very smart guy. And he does lots of good work at his free man's perspective. So I'd encourage everybody to go and check that out. Subscription's like $100 a year or something. It's inconsequential and it's great stuff. But I think that we have to, a lot of us, we tend, because we live in a meme world now, where we're focused on the narratives of the broader society and these political tribalism and all that, and all of that, it's all fundamentally seems it's not going to provide the meaning that you need in your life in order to feel like your life is meaningful, which we all have to have. So, focusing on the things that you do have control over, which is, your conduct, the people around you, the world around you, and realizing that all the world is entropy, including the political systems and the memes that are driving the narratives in our culture today. It's all a victim of entropy. And that, but the unique power you have as an individual is basically to creatively push back against it, to add the energy that keeps it from falling off and dying.
Yeah, that's right. And as the world is winding down, in some ways, it really seems like that's an accurate statement at this point. It's said that there are 50 or 60,000 generally, is this correct? 50 or 60,000 generally middle-aged white males that commit suicide by taking drugs like opiates, fentanyl and such every year. Now, why is this such an academic problem? It wasn't a problem before the Harrison Act in 1913, which illegalized some drugs like opium. Why is it a problem today when everybody's hooked on some kind of a drug? And I think it's because they have no meaning in their life. And drugs kind of kill the pain of being a walking zombie without meaning.
That's right. Temporarily.
Temporarily. Yeah, exactly. So you're not going to solve the drug problem or, frankly, the civilizational collapse or anything unless everybody figures out how to get meaning in their lives. So how do you do that? Well, you educate yourself and start figuring things out and piecing things together by yourself. I don't know how else to do it. I hope we have a positive effect with this podcast from that point of view.
I hope so too. Paul quotes Eric Hoffer at one point in here. He says, in an adequate social order, the untalented should be able to acquire a sense of usefulness and of growth without interfering with the development of talent around them. And I think that's, you have to recognize if you feel like people are encroaching on you, the cult, like the society is like attacking the talented, starts eating itself. It's because those people don't have an adequate sense of usefulness and growth. And that's because all of the meaning has been sucked away. So yeah, hopefully we can help around that.
Yeah. And I'm sure putting everybody on a guaranteed annual income, which they're effectively doing now with the next round of multi-trillion-dollar currency printing, just giving it to people, that does exactly the opposite of giving people personal meaning. It destroys their personal meaning.
It does. Yep, it totally does. All right. Well, would love to hear people's feedback on this and any other thoughts they have on meaning and entropy. Actually, we did have someone who was commenting yesterday. We actually have a physicist who specializes in thermodynamics who was listening to our podcast and commented yesterday and said he loved when we talked about sustainable development. And we talked about the second law of thermodynamics before. And I said, oh, well, just wait till tomorrow. We're going to talk about entropy and the meaning of life. And he's like, he was very excited about it. So we're being judged here by a physicist who truly understands these principles far better than we do, but we're doing our best.
That's very gratifying and flattering, I've got to say. It
really is. All right. So we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much for your time today, Doug. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
Thanks, Matt.